Well, good morning again, parishioners and friends of St. John's. Once again, I'm Peter Floyd. I'm the rector here at St. John's, and I'm joined by John Horn, our senior warden, and Dan Robertson. He is the head of our finance committee. And this is part 3 of a video series on the State of the Church Forum. And as you might have guessed by Dan's presence with us, we're going to talk about church finances. So good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I guess I'll just start off with firing away here, Dan. Just how are we doing financially?
Peter, I'm happy to report that considering the environment that we're in, I think we have a very good financial position, probably better than I would have expected in the face of a pandemic. But we're in very good shape through seven months. Our contributions are right on budget, and our expenses are lower than budget by $100,000 because we haven't been operating. We've been, certain expenses are continuing, but if you go by the fact that our contributions are on budget and our expenses are less, we are about $100,000 better compared to budget than we had planned to be at this point in time. We've got a good part of the year left ahead of us, but I think we're in very good shape right now.
Awesome. And that seems like a lot of money, but of course it's what are we, a $1.5 million budget. So comparatively speaking, I suppose maybe it's not as much as it sounds. For my household, it would sound great, right. but for the whole church. So that sounds pretty good. Now, I mean, I know that there was some concern about giving, sort of early on. I know in March we did okay, and then we sort of dipped down a little bit. So just so people know, we're doing well, and the sort of government program called the Payroll Protection Program came out, and we thought, well, we don't really need to apply because we're doing okay. Then in April, things really sort of dipped down, and there was some concern, and so we applied for that. And let me just say right on the video here, thank you to Dan, who went all over the map, literally, working hard to secure some of the government funding. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many banks you went to, but maybe you'll talk about that process of trying to find it, and then what that means for us in terms of having secured that loan.
Okay. That's a great kickoff, Peter, but I'll just say, and give our listeners some insight as to how we put our numbers together for the year. Basically, the biggest asset we have is cash. And that's how we pay our bills. We use the cash basis, and everything that we report is pretty much on a cash basis. But we ended last year in round numbers, say around $400,000 of cash. And we put together a balanced budget. In other words, after we go through our stewardship campaign, we know what to expect from pledges, not so much on plate offerings and loose offerings and things of that nature, but we've got a pretty good handle on the money coming in. And then we go through all our expenses and all our programs, outreach, staff requirements, etc. And we end up with expenses that equal our contributions. So last year when we put the budget together, we certainly were not anticipating a pandemic.
Correct.
And, so we thought we would, be going through the year. We'd, meet our contribution numbers, pay our expenses, and then end the year about where we had started. That's our objective each year. But didn't take long to see that, that things were going on. There was a lot of talk in January and February about a pandemic. We weren't really seeing the effects at that point in time. But we knew it was out there. So we didn't, Peter mentioned the PPP loan. I think that came out somewhere in February, March timeframe, but we didn't pursue it right away because we didn't think we would need it. First quarter was great. We were far ahead of budget with the help of some very generous donors who prepaid their pledges. We got cash on the front end. So we made it through the first quarter looking really, really good. And it was not until about April, and then when we first saw the signs, I think we had a loss. When I say a loss, our expenses exceeded our contributions in April, and then it was worse in May. We had the Easter season that came through, and because the church was essentially shut down and we weren't meeting, pledges were slow to come in, and more importantly, the non-pledged revenue didn't come in. There's a good portion of our collections that don't come in if you don't meet. So we didn't have that. So it was along about the middle of May where we got a little more insight as to what was going on, that we felt we needed to go out and see about getting this PPP money while it was still available. So as Peter mentioned, I went around to a number of banks and found that it was a little harder than I anticipated. That a lot of the money was gone, and a lot of the lenders, the Small Business Administration requires that you go through a lender. Most of the lenders didn't have funds to lend. And fortunately, we found a bank, U.S. Bank. I think we went to about 8 different banks, but finally landed on U.S. Bank, and they had some money, and we started the process. It's really just a matter of pulling together some history on our operations. What are we spending in payroll and payroll-related costs, how many employees we have, that kind of thing. Pulling the information together and submitting the application. We did that, and very quickly after we submitted the application, we got the funding. And the amount of the loan was $227,500 in round numbers. It's formula driven. It's based on 2.5 times your average payroll cost.
And that payroll, Dan, includes the school as well, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great point, John, that we filed the application based on St. John's as a single entity. And as you know, there's a lot of things under that umbrella, and preschool is one of those. And they had a number of employees. And so we had to get the records for them also, and more or less consolidate them on our application, which we did. And we were very blessed to have gotten that loan because it gave us some cushion. We're a big church, as Peter mentioned, but $227,000 goes a long way toward paying.
And Dan, you speak about a loan. So when I think of the terminology of a loan, it means that it all gets paid back.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that the case of a PPP loan?
Yes and no. It is a loan, and all things being equal, which they never are, the loan would have to be repaid at some point. However, they give us a lot of flexibility for obtaining forgiveness of that loan. As long as the proceeds are used for certain things, primarily payroll and related costs, and you can maintain your compensation levels and your full-time equivalent headcount, you will get forgiveness. So it's possible to get 100% forgiveness on this loan. I say that, but I don't think it's likely in our case that we'll get 100%, but we'll get a good chunk of it forgiven. The reason I don't think we'll get 100% is because we have some issues that we're up against in our preschool. They are late starting. They pretty much started shutting down, I think, about mid-May this year. Mm-hmm. So they haven't been operating during the summer, and they're not expected to bring teachers back until September. So that presents some issues from a headcount standpoint, because one of the rules for forgiveness is that you will maintain your full-time equivalent headcount. So it makes it hard, especially we have what's referred to as a covered period. It starts from the day that we get the funds, the proceeds from the loan, and it ends 24 weeks out into the future, which puts it around November 15th. So if we can, if our averages during that covered period meet or exceed what they were pre-pandemic, and I won't get into how you define pre-pandemic, there's all kinds of rules around that, then we'll get forgiveness. If not, if we're only at, say, 75%, then we get 75% forgiven, and then we have to pay 25%.
So I'm curious, let's say that there is some portion of it, and it sounds likely that there will be, that we will need to pay back. How long do we have to pay that back, and what's the percent interest on it?
Well, that's a great question. The rules have actually changed a little bit since we got our loan, because they came out, I think they call it it was first part of the CARES Act, and then in July they came up with the PPP Flexibility Act. And originally it was 1%, and it's going to stay a 1% loan. So it's almost free money at 1%. It was a 2-year duration originally when we applied, but they have changed the rules now to make it a 5-year duration. So it's been spread out over a longer period of time. And as far as when you start making payments, you've got the forgiveness calculation starts at the end of your covered period, and then you go out for 10 months. You have 10 months before you actually file your forgiveness application. So you're buying more time in there, and then it's probably 3 to 6 month process to get it approved by the SBA. So I'm not giving you a definitive answer, but we have a significant amount of time after our covered period before we even have to start making payments.
Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but is this something we have to consider for the budget for 2021 then? Is that something we should build into the budget?
Well, usually when we put a budget together, we're only talking about our operating side of the house. It's contributions and expenses, and this loan is kind of outside. It's sitting on the balance sheet right now. We can't recognize forgiveness based on what we think will happen. In other words, the accounting rules say that loan sits on your balance sheet as a liability until it is paid off or forgiven. Mm-hmm. Well, it may be, hypothetically, it could be 2 years before we know whether it's going to be forgiven.
Forgiven or not.
Yeah. And we will, for the portion that is forgiven, it will show up in our P&L as a gain or miscellaneous income item. In other words, you're writing off a debt. So the other side of that is a gain in your financial statements.
Right.
So
let me ask this. You mentioned in the beginning of the video here that we were doing well, that our expenses, and we had about $100,000 extra rolling around out there. Obviously, we're having some gain from the loan, but why are we concerned? It seems like there's some concern that we may or may not break even by the end of the year. I know I have a chart that might help people understand that, but I thought maybe you could help explain that.
Okay, you're going to put the chart up?
Yeah, let me think that ought to do it. Go ahead.
Okay, this is a pretty neat chart in that it shows our contribution revenues that as they come in. The blue line is the actual down through August, and then you can see the rest of the year is in essence a forecast. And then the top line is the previous year. So you can see in the first quarter, we did very well. Our blue line is ahead of last year, so we were doing very well. And then you can see in the May time frame, we started working on our PPP loan. But we have an awful lot of uncertainty as we move forward in the year, because we have two periods in the year where our contributions are significantly higher, Easter and then Christmas. So we have Christmas coming up, and it's hard to know what to expect. We know what's pledged, but so far, our pledged income is running just a tad below last year, not much. But if we're not meeting, we're not going to get the general offering or the non-pledged contributions. And, it's very, very important that we get our pledges for the balance of the year, and especially around Christmas time.
So this is Easter basically last year, and you can see we were below this year as compared to last year. And so I think the concern is this end of the year surge that we wind up getting that makes it all balance out.
Right.
If Christmas happens, if it doesn't, that's a real big unknown. So it's hard to know what that end of year giving will look like.
That's right, Peter. And I will say, the obvious question now is, why would we budget so much in contributions, at the end of the year? And the answer is, we put our budget together last fall, and that's what you see on this chart is historically what happens. We usually get a big chunk of money. People are settling their investments, trying to get their contributions in for tax purposes. There's all kinds of good reasons for it to come in like that. We just hope and pray that it comes in like that.
That it materializes this year.
Right.
Well, as we sort of look forward, let me shift gears on us a little bit here and talk about the Rejuvenate campaign. We talked about that in video 2 a little bit, just in terms of what the property committee is doing with some of the funds that we have already. And obviously there's still funds that we hope will come in. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that has gone, and you may not be as up to date on that.
Sure. Well, I can give us some directional information on how it's done. And again, going back to when we put the budget together, we had not planned to have the Rejuvenate Our Spiritual Home campaign. It was not until January, February of this year. Actually, I think we had our kickoff meeting in February. But I would say it was successful. We got approximately $600,000 in pledges for the Rejuvenate Fund, and that's spread over. We allowed our donors to spread that over a 3-year period, but it is front-end loaded. It's about $350,000, $360,000 that's actually coming in this year. And it's actually sitting on our balance sheet. It is a restricted fund because it is meant for capital expenditures to improve the appearance and functionality of the church. So,
well, some people may think, hey, there's lots of money we could dip into that if we need it, to balance our budget or meet expenses. My understanding is that's not true. So maybe you just clarify that.
That is true. It is. We use a fund accounting approach for keeping our accounting records, and this is what's referred to as a designated fund. In other words, we set expectations when we went out and asked for money to do this, and the requirement is that we will actually use the money for these things.
Right.
And they actually flow through the property committee and also the finance committee to ensure that we have the funding and that this is the uses are appropriate for what we have in that fund.
Then and Dan, it's finally approved by the vestry.
That's correct. Absolutely, John. Thank you. So even though it was a plus to our assets, it's cash that we have sitting out there, cash and near cash, because some of it is still in the form of pledges. But it gives us the ability to tackle some of these capital needs that we have without affecting our operations.
Got it. So it sounds to me like the hope is with our budget that if people continue to give well and continue to give and meet their pledge, that coupled with our payroll protection plan loan, we should come out okay.
That's correct. I'm feeling pretty good about things right now. But
Yeah, and we have some money to start some good projects with the Rejuvenate campaign, and then of course we'll see where things go in the year 2 and 3 that the pledges are paid off.
Right.
And the last
Dan,
thing I have, oh, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, Peter. I'm just going to ask Dan just to kind of just talk a little bit about the endowment program. I think that's an important part of the finances, right, of the whole Church of St. Peter's, of St. John's.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about the endowment program other than the fact that I know we have quite a bit in cash in the program right now, and it kind of ebbs and flows with the stock market. And so we've had some pretty tense moments at times this year when, especially, I guess in about the May time frame when the market started declining pretty rapidly. Actually, it might be a little in the February, March, April time frame that we saw a pretty significant decline in the valuation of our investments. But since that time, it has rebounded very nicely, and we have $860,000 in assets in our endowment fund. So we're in pretty good shape there.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
has
so
rebounded nicely.
I sit on obviously on just about every committee in the church, and yes, it's been good news that it did flow more than it ebbed, I think, or whatever's worse in the beginning, and then it did come back. So it seems to be back kind of to where it was before the pandemic, with some hope about if it just stays steady through the year, I think we'll be pleased with that. But once again, some parishioner might think, well, hey, if you've got $800,000 around the endowment, yay, you can, again, use this money to support your operating expenses and your salaries and whatnot. Maybe you'd speak to that.
Well, yeah, whether it's the endowment or the PPP loan or the Rejuvenate campaign, these are all restricted funds, and they're only going to be used for certain things. The PPP loan, yes, it's nice to have that money, but it can only be used for payroll costs primarily. There's some other things it can be used for, but for us, it's primarily the payroll costs, and that's what it was designed for, and it's been a terrific help there. The Rejuvenate fund will only be used for capital projects that will help us restore and preserve the church, and then the endowment is the same type thing. That has to be. We can't just jump in and use those funds. It's managed by the endowment committee.
Yeah, in fact, there are quite a number of barriers around those funds that were put up intentionally to protect the endowment, as it should be. Right. One thing that's interesting, I think, we just talked briefly about our expenses. A lot of people may think, well, if the church isn't really in the building, then all the expenses are really low. And in fact, that might not necessarily be true. There are a lot of contracts that still need to be paid. I mean, we're still having lawn mow. There's still electrical and water, and those expenses are still salary expenses for staff because we didn't want to lay people off. There's still, outreach. We wanted to give. We had budgeted for the first time in many years money to outreach, and we didn't want to not help people during a pandemic. And so we've dug deeply in there to try to give as much as we can and be faithful in that regard. So just want to maybe if you'd speak just about expenses a little bit, just so people can get an idea of where does all this money go?
Well, we have a number of places it goes. So the first place it goes is for staff, our personnel costs. It takes a lot of human capital to run the church. So, that's a fixed expense for us to meet that every month. We have buildings and grounds, not the things that come out of the Rejuvenate, but the ordinary operating expenses to maintain the church on a month-to-month basis. We have outreach programs, we have other activities and things like that. Some expenses like activities will be reduced because we're not doing a lot of activities right now, or haven't been.
Sure. I think about Jillian's mission trips and
Sure, those
retreats.
types of things, Wednesday night dinners and, those type things. And if you're not meeting, there's some expenses that will go away in the near term. But I would say the majority of our expenses are fixed. And, utilities, if you gotta keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm. And Dan, even though kind of officially, let's say the church is closed, we still have a commitment to the diocese. Right?
That's correct.
That's
a good point, and we haven't backed off of that. That runs about $12,000 a month that we pay toward our quota.
Yeah, the diocese, of course, still has staff to pay who are doing amazing things to try to help churches through this difficult time. And of course, they're trying to help those churches that are less fortunate than St. John's try to squeeze and, deal with their own budgets and get through their tough time as well. So a lot of people have said we're all in this together. And in many ways, that's true, not just for us as a church, but for us as a diocese as well.
Right.
Peter, I have a question for you that everybody may be interested in. Is we've spoken obviously a lot about St. John's financial health, and it's good news. How do we compare to other parishes? What do you hear?
Yeah, it depends on the parish, right? So if it's a working class parish and people are being laid off or aren't able to find work, sometimes that can be a real struggle. Suburban parishes, in the more affluent areas like St. John's, those churches seem to be doing okay. If I served a parish once where a lot of people had income from stock market, and some of that. So I would imagine for them, that may raise an eyebrow. Now some of that has come back, so I don't know where they land. But obviously, there's some, when you get financial flux, that can be scary for people depending on where they are. But I think a lot of people are in the same boat we're in. They just don't know what's going to happen. And a lot of people are in that same boat as well with their own personal finances. They're just wondering what will happen. And it seems, as we sort of look around, that maybe for some of us, especially those who are on a more fixed income, that things will be okay and the waters will be smooth and we'll be able to get through this. And we're adjusting to sort of a temporary new normal until things can sort of go back to being able to be in person and that sort of thing. But hopefully people will remain faithful to the church and faithful to their commitment in that way, and we'll be able to put things back and restore, things to where they were, so that we can be in person and enjoy all the wonderful things we want to do, all the non-fixed expenses Dan talked about, like the Wednesday night dinner and that's all the fun stuff.
Exactly.
Those are it's interesting when you put a budget together, you're usually like, all right, we've got our fixed expenses. Then you really hope people give, because that's all the cool stuff that you can do to have a get together. And we want to make sure we save a little bit to have a big fun time when we are all able to join one another. And what a blessing that will be.
Yes, it will be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And really appreciate all the effort Dan has put into this. I mean, working behind the scenes, running around to different banks, trying to make us really get a good handle on what we're dealing with in terms of our finances. And finally, just to thank all of the parishioners who continue to support St. John's faithfully and giving to the life of our church. It is so needed. And I think signs are good. We're going to be okay. But hopefully people will continue to give so that stays a reality and we're able to come out and make it through this sort of really difficult storm that we're facing.
Excellent. Dan, thank you for your time this morning.
Sure, I'm glad to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, thank you.
God bless you all. And this sort of concludes our State of the Church Forum in this third video. As I said in the other ones, if you all have any questions about anything that's going on at St. John's, feel free to just reach out. You can send an email to anybody you saw in the videos, but especially John and I. We'll be happy to get back to you with an answer. That's it.
Thank you.
God bless you all.
And you too.